Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is TowerGate day number 1206, 1206, Thursday, July the 30th, 2020. Thank you so much for tuning in. Okay, so let's go ahead and go through the news of the last 24 hours as it relates to Spygate. Spygate, that's what we're all about right here. First of all, just real quick on the Spygate portion of Attorney General Barr's so-called hearing yesterday, which was ridiculous. I'm sure many of you have seen some of the clips. I didn't watch the entire interview, but I watched quite a few clips, various people interviewing him or asking questions. It was ridiculous, and I'm sure most of you know what I'm talking about. But the thing I want to focus on here is that at any time during those hearings, I noticed that the Democrats, whenever they were talking to Barr about John Durham's investigation and all this kind of stuff, the thing that they seemed most interested in doing with Barr was to try to intimidate him. It's clear if you look at their tone of voice, the way that they dealt with the issue was about trying to intimidate Attorney General Barr by suggesting that if he were to allow Durham to take any type of action, such as filing criminal charges or anything like that, issuing a report or anything like that, having Durham do anything before the election, that they would consider that interfering in the election. So we can already see they've got the script written, which we've known this for a long time. Attorney General Barr understands this as well. But essentially, the message they were sending to Attorney General Barr was, if you allow Durham, or if you and Durham bring up anything about this Russiagate investigation, whether it's a report or filing indictments against people, charging people with crimes, anything like that that you do before the election, we're going to consider that interfering in the election, which could be an impeachable offense. So this is what they were trying to do in regards to the Spygate questioning, is to intimidate Barr, to try to get him to back down, or even to get him to have to say or capitulate to them and say, okay, well, we'll wait till after the election or something like that. But he didn't do that. Barr never backed down, and I'm sure he was not intimidated. I'm sure he was expecting that. So he didn't appear to be intimidated at all. In fact, my guess is that Attorney General Barr was probably pretty ticked off when he left that hearing. My guess is he went home and probably had a double shot of scotch on the rocks, and then a second and a third, and he was probably pretty ticked off, would be my guess. So I don't think they were successful in intimidating Attorney General Barr. If anything, I think he's probably, knowing Attorney General Barr, he seems like he's got kind of a stubborn streak to him. So my guess is that he'll be pushing even harder for Durham to come out before the election and lay some indictments on some people, or issue a damaging report and talk about where they are in the case, maybe talk about some plea deals or what have you. So I think that had the opposite effect. I don't think it intimidated Barr at all. I think it probably ticked him off even worse, because it was almost like a challenge to him. You better not release any information about Durham's investigation before the election, or else. And he knows what "or else" means: impeachment. And he knows they can do the same exact thing they did to Trump. They can have a vote in the House, all the Democrats will sign on to it, they can get impeachment, then it will go over to the Senate, where they won't be able to get the votes to impeach Barr. But the thing is, it's too late in the game probably. I don't think that they could get this done now with the short period of time that they have, and in fact that would look very political on them. So I don't think that they really have much of a position here with Barr. I think the only thing that they tried to do was to get some intimidation, to make him maybe think twice about things. But I don't think Barr cares. I really don't. I mean, his reputation, he's even said this, his reputation is what it is. He already served as Attorney General. He was basically retired. He's a multi-millionaire. it's not going to affect his relationship with his friends, his family, people who like him or whatever. So I don't really think that there's much that they can do with Barr. I think he could, pretty much could care less about the Democrats. Obviously, he doesn't think very highly of them. We could see that in his response to many of them in the hearings yesterday. But I don't think that their intimidation worked on him. I think it probably backfired. I think now Barr probably has more resolve to do exactly the thing that they were trying to intimidate him with. That's just how Barr seems to me. Kind of a hard-headed person who's like the type of person you don't push, because he will, in his own way, come back and make you pay for that type of behavior towards him. He's kind of reminds me of Trump in a way. He's not a passive sort of person, just sits there and lets you kick him around. And he has a lot of tools at his disposal, and he knows that by allowing Durham to issue subpoenas or charges or lay indictments or whatever, it's not an impeachable offense against the Attorney General. If the crimes were committed and the U.S. Attorney Durham can prove those charges or get plea deals or whatever, it's legit. It's legit, and you can try to spin it as a Democrat and say, well, it's all political, but I think it's not in the news media, in the Democrats, it's exactly what they're going to do. That's their plan. But it's not going to be very effective because the average person understands that, if Durham or Barr come up and give a press conference and they lay out the crimes and they lay out exactly what did happen and they've got the facts and the evidence on their side, that's going to weigh far more heavily with people than a bunch of media hacks and Democrats just squawking about things. So I think Barr is in very, very good shape. I think he knows he's in very good shape. He has nothing to fear, nothing to worry about. And if anything, I think he's probably more loaded for bear to drop the heavy on these people. I think all they did was piss him off, and probably it's going to backfire. Because even if he had any second thoughts about it, now I'm sure that he's not going to allow himself to be intimidated. And now, if he doesn't do something before the election, it will look as if the intimidation worked. And I think now Barr's going to look at it just like that and go, wait a minute. If I don't do something before the election, now it's going to look like the Democrats are going to think that they intimidated me. And I'm not going to have any of that. So that's why I think it's probably going to backfire. So I'm awfully glad that the Democrats took that line with Barr. I think they're going to regret it. But I think he was going to do what he was going to do anyway, quite honestly. So that's my take on that. Now, let's move on to this article again. Back to this article with Chuck Ross. There's a lot in this article. Every time you read it, you find something else. And not that there's any great revelations here. There's a few revelations, but more questions than answers from this particular article. And I think that's what Chuck Ross intended. He's raising a lot of questions. So let's go through some of this. And again, there's no great revelations here. There's a few, but nothing great. It's more of an article to get you questioning some things. And I'm in the same lane with Chuck Ross. When I get this information, I'm the same way. I'm like, wait a minute. Why? Who? How? All these sorts of questions pop up in my mind. So let's go through some of this real quick, and I'll show you what I mean. So the involvement or non-involvement, however you want to look at it, regarding Sergey Millian still continues to be pretty much of a mystery. I would like to see Millian in a public hearing be asked some very good questions. Because we get Millian's take, then we get everything else that's been written about him. And there was the thing that gives me pause, the only thing, I for the most part believe Millian. I do. But I'm very curious, and he admits that he did reach out to Papadopoulos with a business opportunity. And I would be very interested in knowing how that how that happened, what transpired. Did Millian know Papadopoulos? Why did he reach out to Papadopoulos and make this, offer? Now, the offer that Papadopoulos says Millian made to him, and what Millian says that the offer he made to Papadopoulos, they're at odds. So Papadopoulos and Millian are at odds over exactly what transpired, the specific details of what transpired. But neither Millian does admit contacting Papadopoulos, and Papadopoulos admits that he was contacted by Millian for a business opportunity. There's some details that the two have issues about how much money would be paid to Papadopoulos, and the fact that he had to be working for Trump. They seem to be at odds over that, but we know that happened. Okay, at least ways Papadopoulos and Millian both admit that Millian approached Papadopoulos with a business opportunity. I would be very interested to know how Millian got onto Papadopoulos. Did they know each other? Did someone tell Millian to approach him? Exactly how did that work? I'd be very interested in that. So, because there's something there. There's again, it's like that puzzle that's missing some pieces. It's not altogether clear until we understand who or exactly what predicated Millian reaching out to Papadopoulos to make this offer of a business opportunity. I'd like to know more about the background there and what happened. So, having said that, let's move on. So, Danchenko says that he contacted Millian after asking a journalist friend for tips on anyone who might have information on Donald Trump. Now, Danchenko says he turned to this journalist. Now, we do believe at this time that the journalist that he is referring to is Dmitry Zlodarev, Z-L-O-D-O-R-E-V, Zlodarev, or Zodarev, maybe the L is silent, I don't know, but Z-L-O-D-O-R-E-V, Dmitry. Now, Zolodarev is a veteran reporter for TASS, and TASS is kind of like the Russian version of the AP. It's like the general news service, newswire service for Russia, just like AP is like the general news service in the U.S. So that's who he's been working for 30 some odd years. He's a Russian. He has been U.S. based though since 1992. He's very connected in Washington. If you see a picture of him, you will probably recognize his face. You will have seen him in press conferences and stuff like that. He's been in the media pool as a reporter for TASS. And he's a general reporter that throughout his career for TASS has covered everything from sports and entertainment to politics. So he's a fairly wide-ranging character. He speaks 3 languages fluently, English, Russian, and Spanish. And keep in mind that TASS is a state-owned media agency in Russia. Okay, so it's not like a private, it's like the BBC or something. TASS is probably closer to the BBC because it's like a state-owned, it's the general state-owned news agency for Russia. And he is the U.S.-based Russian journalist. If you go to his Facebook, he's got about 450 friends. 90% of them are Russians. There are some who are U.S.-based, work in the U.S., but most of them appear to be Russian and living in Russia. So Danchenko reaches out to this journalist who we believe is Dmitry Zodarev, however you pronounce that. These Russian names are tough. And he said, hey, do you know anybody that might have any information on Trump? And it appears that Dmitry Zolodarev had done an interview with Sergey Millian. And he had done the interview with Millian in April of 2016. April of 2016 is when Zolodarev did the interview with Millian. And so he told Danchenko, he said, hey, well, I interviewed this one guy, Belarusian guy who's got a lot of connections in Russia and the U.S., and he knows Trump and blah, 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 blah. And he said, you may want to reach out to him. So apparently this is how Danchenko got onto Millian, is through this journalist who works for TASS, the Russian news agency. It's just the timing is interesting. And again, I'd like to know more about why Zolotarev would be interested in interviewing Sergey Millian, because Zolotarev is a very senior reporter for TASS. I mean, he covers the White House, he covers the Defense Department, and particularly he's in 2016 specifically, he had been covering very closely the State Department, and was in fact in the media pool covering John Kerry. John Kerry, as he was making his trips abroad, Zolotarev was in the press pool for TASS covering John Kerry. And then he interviews Millian in 2016, and so when Danchenko reaches out to Zolotarev, he says, yeah, you might want to try this guy Millian, who I interviewed, who says he knows Trump. So a lot of questions there, and the timing is interesting. What was the relationship between Danchenko and Zolotarev? Chances are they know each other. That's probably true, and maybe it was a friend he's reaching out to. Did someone motivate him to do that? Why was Zolotarev interviewing Millian? Millian's a small player. He's not a major player in anything, that I'm aware of, that would make him an interesting figure or target for an interview for someone like Zolotarev, who's a 30-year senior reporter for TASS, covering, major political figures all over the world. All over the world, he covers people, top players, follows the major happenings with the top tier of people in government, meets with leaders of foreign countries and interviews them and stuff. So he's reaching out to Millian in 2016. What made Millian such an interesting interview? It's almost like this was set up. It almost looks like it was set up. So Millian does an interview with Zolotarev in April 2016 where he suggested he knew Trump and had been in contact with members of his campaign. And who would he be talking about? He says members. The only one we're aware of is Papadopoulos. So it's very convenient that Zolotarev would have interviewed Millian, who's pretty much a nobody in the world of global politics on either side of the ocean. He's not a player in the U.S. He's not a player in Russia. He's not a player anywhere. He's a real estate investor and a guy who tries to bring capital, Russian capital, together with American business people. That's what he does, and he's not a major name, So you got to wonder how that relationship came about, and it's curious that Millian would be reaching out to Papadopoulos. It's almost like these things were made to happen. Someone was, manipulating these events. They're too convenient to be coincidental. You know what I mean? They're too convenient to be coincidental. That's all I'm saying. I smell a rat. Something going on here. I don't know what it is. There's missing pieces. But something is going on. I would like to have a more thorough interview of Millian and try to understand more about answer these questions. Now, so far as the claim that's being made by Danchenko that Millian was his source for the PP-Gate story, which is what's been reported, that does not work, because the PP-Gate story was part of Christopher Steele's July 20th, 2016 memo. The PP-Gate story was part of the July 20th, 2016 Steele memo. Problem is, Danchenko didn't speak with Millian until a little more than a month later. How could Millian be the source for the PP-Gate story if the PP-Gate story appeared in Steele's memo over a month before Danchenko even allegedly spoke to Millian? You see, it's another timeline problem. There's a lot of problems with the timelines that need to be explained. And so I looked into Zolotarev, and he's legit. He is, again, a veteran reporter for TASS. He's been U.S.-based since 1992. He's been with TASS for over 30 years. He also does independent journalism on the side. He's connected. He's in Washington, D.C. He's been there for 30 years, or since 1992. He knows a lot of people. He has very good relations with a lot of U.S. government agencies. He has very deep connections with a lot of Russian and Chechnyan government officials. And in 2016, he was primarily focused on covering the activities of the U.S. State Department, particularly following John Kerry around in the press pool for TASS covering John Kerry and things involving issues between the U.S. and Russia. And he was looking at it from the U.S. State Department side while reporting for TASS, the Russian government news agency, including being on foreign trips with Kerry and other journalists. Which means that it's possible that John Kerry would have known, or probably knows, Zolotarev. And then, of course, we go back to all those stories. Right after the dossier came out, all the focus was on Millian. That's all you heard. Millian. He was the source. He was Steele's primary source. And where did all that come from? Why was the media writing all these stories focusing on Millian? When we now know, according to Danchenko himself, he's not even sure if that one 10-minute phone call even was Millian. He's not even sure. A 10-minute phone call where the PP-Gate story wasn't even discussed, somehow Millian becomes the source of it, despite the fact that the conversation happened a month after Steele had already put it in his memo. Yet that's what the press was reporting, that Millian was the source of the PP-Gate story, when we actually know it was Cody Shearer. So they're protecting Cody Shearer, obviously, but here's some interesting facts. Why was the media focused so hard on Millian and not Danchenko? I mean, Danchenko was, if they wanted to focus on Christopher Steele's real source, it wasn't Millian. And they knew it. It was Danchenko, according to what we were being told. So why were they pushing Millian while ignoring Danchenko? Well, it might have something to do with the fact that we know that Glenn Simpson of Confusion GPS was the guy pushing Millian. It was Glenn Simpson who was calling all these media outlets and said, hey, you might want to check on this guy Millian. I think Millian may have something to do with Trump-Russia collusion. So Simpson is pushing the name Millian. Also, in Simpson's book, Glenn Simpson's book, he says that Nellie Orr researched Millian beginning in 2015, fall of 2015. So here we are, the fall of 2015, long before Millian's supposed to be into the picture, 6, 7, 8 months before Millian's even supposed to be in the picture, and Nellie is looking into Millian. Why? Simpson calls Brian Ross of ABC News and tells him, hey, you ought to talk to Millian. Christopher Steele was pushing Millian to the FBI, which, and as a result of Steele pushing Millian to the FBI opens a counterintelligence investigation into Millian right after Steele drops his name to the FBI, and that was in October of 2016. We also know that Steele dropped Millian's name to Kathleen Kvalik when he went over and talked to her at the State Department. It's in her notes. We're also learning that Steele never told Simpson the name of his primary subsource, according to Nellie Orr. According to Nellie Orr, Glenn Simpson did not know the name of Steele's primary subsource. Was Steele misleading Simpson in suggesting that his primary subsource was Millian when it was actually Danchenko? We're not really sure. We need more questions. Days before Danchenko met with the FBI, Steele and Simpson discussed with Bruce Orr their concern for the safety of Steele's dossier source. So the day before Danchenko goes to meet with the FBI, and we assume he did this without telling Steele, he goes to meet with the FBI. The day before, we have Simpson and Steele talking about how nervous they are with Bruce Orr. Talking to Bruce Orr about how nervous they are and how worried they are for the safety of Steele's dossier source. Now, they were obviously talking about his real dossier source, at least as the narrative goes, which is Danchenko. But they certainly weren't concerned about dropping Millian's name all over town to the FBI, the State Department, and the media. ABC, the Daily Beast, Mother Jones, the whole 9 yards. Steele and Simpson are dumping Millian's name all over town, including the FBI and the State Department, while at the same time being concerned about Steele's source. Would be, we assume, Danchenko, if you believe the narrative. We also know that the FBI used Millian once the dossier came out, and a lot of the information in there was initially being attributed to Millian. The FBI used that release of the dossier and the information about Millian, used that and used Millian himself as a cover to be able to justify their initial contact with Papadopoulos. By going to Papadopoulos and saying, hey, we're interested in this source for the dossier, the one that was just released by BuzzFeed. We understand that one of the guys who's alleged to be a main source is this guy Millian. And we heard that he reached out to you regarding some business opportunity. You want to tell us more about that, George? How convenient. How convenient. Millian reaches out to Papadopoulos, and then, a month and a half later, all of a sudden, the dossier gets released, and all of a sudden, Millian's name's been, pushed all over town by Simpson and Steele. And they use that as a way to justify getting to Papadopoulos to interview him. And instead of being truthful with Papadopoulos, instead they lie and they say that they want to talk to him because he apparently had this interaction with Millian, who's believed to be a source in that dossier that was just published by BuzzFeed. You see, these things are lining up too well to be purely coincidental. These appear to be manipulated events. Manipulated events, just like everything else. None of this stuff is just pure coincidence, an accident, and twists of fate. No way. Millian is not a major player. Papadopoulos is not a major player. Yet they get caught up in this, and there's all this interest in them. The whole time, Steele and Simpson are pushing Millian while protecting Steele's real source. Why? Who put the target on Millian? Who directed people to make contact with Millian? Who may have suggested to Millian to make contact with Papadopoulos? Who may have suggested to this TASS news reporter to make contact with Millian? It's like he was being set up in a series of steps, 2, 3, 4 steps, because they had an end game plan. These things are too coincidental in a town like Washington, D.C. There's much more to be learned here, my friends. There are pieces of this puzzle that are missing, and I hope Durham finds them. Well, we have 2 other bits of information you might be interested in. Judicial Watch has won a big court victory yesterday, and they have issued an immediate order to the FBI in this case, which is the case that Judicial Watch sued the FBI to get Andy McCabe's text messages, and they have won the case. A judge has ordered that the FBI begin immediately processing those McCabe text messages and make them available to Judicial Watch. Judicial Watch does a hell of a job. Congratulations again. I'll be interested to see what we learn from those. And of course, back to that little interview with Valerie Jarrett, something else that kind of popped up in that interview that has gone kind of unnoticed even by me the first time around, was that she says that it was Lindsey Graham who told or advised John McCain to give the dossier to the FBI. That apparently when David Kramer went and retrieved the dossier for the purpose of passing it over to McCain, which he did, gives it to McCain. Apparently, McCain made Lindsey Graham aware of the dossier, and Lindsey Graham, according to Valerie Jarrett, is the one who told McCain to turn the dossier over to the FBI. Lindsey Graham telling McCain to do that. That's according to Valerie Jarrett. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. It certainly could be true. We know that they were best friends. McCain probably certainly would have said something to Graham about it. But you wonder why Jarrett would bring that up. Maybe to drive a wedge somewhere, or to maybe jab Lindsey Graham in the eye, poke him in the eye, and say, remember, Lindsey, we got some dirt on you. We can prove that you were somewhat involved in pushing the dossier as well. Which is likely true. We'll find out. Lindsey Graham never wants to talk about John McCain's role in pushing the dossier, does he? Probably because he's the one who advised John McCain to give it to the FBI. The swamp is deep, my friends. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'll be back tomorrow for more TowerGate. See you. Bye.